Before starting the video, make sure to smash that like button. Do it now, it only takes a second to do it, and hit the subscribe button and the bell to turn on notifications so you can be informed whenever I upload new chronicles. Also, visit my website, that is tpchronicles.com. There you can read articles and see videos that cannot be uploaded on YouTube. You don't want to miss those videos. The link is in the description box below. Also, join me on Facebook, Twitter, IG, TikTok, social platforms. If you are down with the campaign, type CN, which stands for Chronicle Nation, in the comment section. Upon that note, let's get into this next video, and it goes like this.
Here. Go away and let us alone.
Oh, scared, huh? Afraid, huh? How long can you stay fresh in that can? Come on, get up and fight, you shivering junkyard. Put your hands up, you lopsided bag of hay.
Now, that's getting personal, Lion.
Yes, get up and teach him a lesson.
Well, what's wrong with you teaching them?
Well, I hardly know him.
Well, I'll get you anyway, Pee-wee.
Shame on you.
What did you do that for? I didn't buy them.
No, but you tried to. It's bad enough picking on a straw man, but when you go around picking on poor little dogs.
Well, you didn't have to go and hit me, did you? Is my nose bleeding?
Well, of course not. My goodness, what a fuss you're making. Well, naturally, when you go around picking on things weaker than you are, why, you're nothing but a great big coward.
You're right. I am a coward.
I want to take the time to introduce you to this new chronicle, The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz breaks down the very essence of the occult secret society, the control technique of this world. The rabbit hole goes very deep if you understand the Wizard of Oz mystic occult messages. There are old movies that we are going to break down. To understand what will take place in our present and in our future, you must go back to the past historical events. The Bible let us know that there's nothing new done under the sun. What has been will happen again. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9 is the origin of a common proverb. There's nothing new under the sun. The verse reads, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. You see, the devil will wait centuries for new people to come upon the earth. Why? Because after centuries, new generations of people that come up on this stage don't know what happened in the past or refuse to realize it. Also, the past is usually covered up with lies. If man could learn from the past, the future would be different. Still, because he may refuse to go back and understand the history because of laziness, the way of the matrix causes people not to use their mentality. So the functionality is a lost cause. To say there's nothing new under the sun means there's nothing new on the earth. All the activity of a man during his lifetime is lost in the grander scheme of things and will soon be forgotten. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 11. That which will be forgotten will soon be repeated. They don't get it in their brain, and the mind is a terrible thing to waste. In a new world order, they don't want you to think. Thinking will become a crime as thinking is a crime today. To keep you living, freedom is a commodity, such as oxygen, water, and everything else. But slavery is not to live, it is to die. There's no growth in slavery, just like there's no growth in the mental captivity. We will examine the Wizard of Oz, and as I quoted, that the rabbit hole goes deep. Chronicle Nation, stand up for the truth, and let's go forward with this great message. Also, again, people, I want to invite you to hit that like button, subscribe, hit that bell, and drop down beneath if you are rolling with the campaign CN, which stands for Chronicle Nation.
The Wizard of Oz is one of the most iconic films in the history of cinema. According to the Library of Congress, it's the single most watched film of all time. Very few artistic works from the 1930s have managed to persist within the public consciousness, but even now, 82 years later, most of you watching know exactly who these characters are. Far less known, however, are the people behind these characters. Principal photography for The Wizard of Oz lasted from October 1938 to March 1939. During these 5 months, the stars of the movie were subject to some of the most horrendous conditions in the history of the American film industry. When it was all said and done, not a single character who set off down the yellow brick road left the land of Oz unscathed. In 1938, the studio bought out the rights to L. Frank Baum's popular children's novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and the rest was history. A history that some members of the cast and crew wish they could forget. Unlike Snow White, The Wizard of Oz was entirely live action, which presented a series of challenges while attempting to transform fantasy into reality. One of the most iconic scenes in all of cinema is Dorothy waking up in the land of Oz and the film transitioning from sepia to color. The official coloring method used to develop the film was Technicolor, which required heavy exposure due to the process of splitting the image into different color channels. As a result, the Oz set required an exorbitant amount of lighting, so much so that the temperature on stage often surpassed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat was suffocating, and stagehands frequently had to be carried off stage after fainting. The set lighting was so intense that some actors even claimed to suffer permanent vision damage. The exhaustion suffered from the oppressive heat was only magnified by the arduous production schedule. For 6 days a week, the actors walked into the studio at 4 a.m. and didn't leave until 7 p.m. A significant part of each actor's day was dedicated to the meticulous preparation and removal of their costumes. The Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Cowardly Lion are one of the most recognizable trios in fiction. All 3 characters were brought to life by the skilled design of makeup artist Jack Dawn. While the costumes presented an impeccable external appearance, conditions weren't so pleasant on the inside. Every morning as the Scarecrow, Ray Bolger would have to spend an hour getting his latex and plastic mask painstakingly glued to his face, and every evening he would spend an hour getting it removed. The mask completely covered his facial pores, meaning that he was physically unable to sweat while wearing it. One could only imagine how it must have felt to wear that thing for 15 hours a day. But Ray Bolger didn't have to imagine. For 22 weeks, it was his reality. By the time filming was complete, the repeated applications of the mask left Bolger with permanent grooves around his mouth and chin, but considering what happened to some of the other actors, he may have gotten off easy. The Tin Man was played by Buddy Ebsen for about 9 days. That's how long he lasted during filming until he was hospitalized from a severe reaction to the Tin Man's metallic makeup. Ebsen's silver face paint was made out of aluminum powder that would eventually coat the inside of his lungs, nearly asphyxiating him. As Ebsen sat bedridden under an oxygen tent in the hospital, the studio could not have given him less sympathy. Producer Mervyn LeRoy repeatedly phoned the hospital, angrily insisting that Ebsen return to the set. After 2 weeks out of action, the studio replaced Ebsen with Jack Haley. Much like Pete Best getting cut from the Beatles, Buddy Ebsen would end up becoming one of the unluckiest men in show business. Not only was he unceremoniously fired from what would have been the biggest role of his career, the incident left him with chronic bronchitis. Jack Haley managed to avoid a catastrophic reaction to the aluminum makeup, but it still gave him a severe eye infection that forced him out of work for days. The rest of the suit was so stiff that it rendered Haley unable to sit down or lie down during filming. In order to rest in between takes, he was forced to lean on a reclining board. But despite all the complications it caused, the Tin Man costume may have still been preferable to that of the Cowardly Lion. Burt Lahr's lion suit was compared to carrying around a mattress. The bulk of the costume consisted of a 60-pound lion hide. A real lion hide. Combined with additional padding, some estimates put the weight of the full costume at 100 pounds. Burt Lahr would become drenched in sweat after just a few minutes, and he would frequently have to take off the suit between shots to avoid exhaustion. The prosthetic mask covering his face didn't allow him to fully open his mouth, forcing him to consume all of his on-set meals through a straw. Halfway through production, Lahr gave in and sacrificed an additional hour each day in the makeup chair so that he could eat solid food at lunch. As someone who was known by his peers to be a hypochondriac, Burt Lahr was in near constant agony. But by far the worst costume-related accident during the whole shoot happened to Margaret Hamilton, better known as the Wicked Witch. Nowadays, there are lots of ways to make someone look green, but in 1938, the only tried-and-true method used by Hollywood makeup artists was copper paint. Copper, of course, is toxic when ingested by humans. This was known back then, but the studio showed no restraint in applying the copper concoction directly to Hamilton's face and hands. Towards the end of production, Hamilton realized that the constant application of the witch's makeup had tinted her skin green, an effect that lingered for months after the job. Wearing the makeup on set was a constant struggle. Once it was on, Hamilton was unable to touch anything without staining it, and required assistance to perform the most basic of tasks. But the day-to-day struggles of the makeup would pale in comparison to the accident she suffered on December 23, 1938. When departing Munchkinland, Hamilton was scripted to exit the scene in a fiery cloud of smoke. The first attempt at the stunt went flawlessly, but director Victor Fleming wanted to get a few extra takes for insurance. On the fourth attempt, the pyrotechnics were ignited too early, causing Hamilton to be engulfed in flames. The accident resulted in second-degree burns on the whole right side of her face. The skin on her right hand was entirely scalded off. But before Hamilton could even receive medical attention, she had to slowly and excruciatingly have the copper makeup removed from her freshly burned skin with rubbing alcohol. Margaret Hamilton would spend the next 6 weeks in the hospital before returning to the set. On her very first day back, she was scheduled for the skywriting scene, another stunt involving pyrotechnics. Hamilton adamantly refused to put herself anywhere near fire again and threatened to walk out of the production right then and there. Since the project was nearing completion at that point, the studio acquiesced, and the scene was completed using Hamilton's stunt double, Betty Danko. While filming that very scene, the smoke pipe underneath the broomstick exploded, and Danko was violently flung from the installation. The explosion was caused by the special effects crew coating the pipe with asbestos, another toxic substance once thought to be an all-purpose wonder material. Asbestos was also used in Ray Bolger's scarecrow suit as well as the snow in the poppy field scene.
Unusual weather we're having, ain't it?
Betty Danko was hospitalized for 11 days with internal damage from the explosion, as well as a 2-inch deep gash on her leg, a wound that would never fully heal. It was a hefty toll for a gig in which she earned just over $800. The long-term health effects on Margaret Hamilton were far less known. What is known is that she would go on to develop Alzheimer's later in her life, a condition that has been linked to copper poisoning. In total, 6 performers on The Wizard of Oz faced some kind of serious physical trauma. Not even Toto left the set intact. However, after enough time had passed, many of the actors could look back on the whole ordeal as a bunch of amusing war stories. Most physical ailments are only temporary. Mental ailments, on the other hand, tend to stick with you for life. And out of everyone in the Land of Oz, perhaps none suffered a worse fate than the star of the show, Judy Garland. She was without a doubt one of the most talented performers of the 20th century. Her portrayal of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz has served as an enduring symbol of youth and innocence. And even though she was never imprisoned by a brutal costume like the other actors, the studio paid no less scrutiny to her appearance. Since the character of Dorothy was envisioned as a prepubescent girl, the then 17-year-old Garland had to constantly wear a tight corset to hide her more mature figure. But that was merely one aspect of the studio's efforts to keep Judy thin. Garland was placed on a shoestring diet, one that would not provide her with enough energy to complete the arduous filming days. To compensate, the studio kept Garland on a steady intake of amphetamines to keep her working long into the day. The amphetamines subsequently necessitated the use of barbiturates to prevent Garland from exhausting herself. Years later, she claimed that during some periods she would only sleep 4 hours every 3 days. The The fact that she was able to perform as well as she did under these conditions is nothing short of astonishing. By the end of production, Garland was addicted to both drugs, an addiction that would last for the rest of her life. It certainly didn't help that her time as a child star directly contributed to deep-rooted psychological problems. Despite her brilliance as a performer, Garland was always encumbered by major esteem issues. The insecurities began when a 14-year-old Garland overheard the MGM executives referring to her as a fat little pig. This moment completely devastated her self-image and manifested itself as an unobtainable standard of perfection that she spent her whole life chasing. And even though she would wind up becoming one of the greatest performers ever, in her mind it was never good enough. In many ways, Judy Garland was the first tragic child star, an archetype that has sadly become much more common in modern times. Clinical psychiatrist John Linden encountered many such patients while practicing in the Los Angeles area. He observed that premature stardom resulted in many child actors forming severe identity issues. They tended to report a feeling of profound emptiness when they weren't performing, as if they were marionettes whose true selves lacked any sort of meaning. The reason so many young stars end up on the downward spiral is that many fail to develop any sense of individual identity. Some attempt to fill this void with sex, drugs, and alcohol, but it's often no match for the constant anxiety of never really understanding who you are. There exists a tragic irony between Judy Garland and Dorothy, a character who wanted nothing more than to find joy and comfort in a wayward world. Unlike Dorothy, however, Judy Garland never made it over the rainbow.
Please take this time to subscribe, hit the bell to turn on your notifications. You may need to come back sometime Tuesdays and Thursdays around 5:45 Eastern Standard Time because YouTube believes in shadow blocking, which means everyone will not get notifications because what they're trying to do is destroy all channels like this that exposes what the enemies are doing. Chronicle Nation, I wanted to show you what these celebrity pawns went through to put this movie or this occult message together in the form of a movie. This was important for the synagogues of Satan to continue its programming on the masses. And I'm going to show you how its programming is in the very DNA of mainstream Babylonian churches and occult beliefs. It controls governments and is in the narrative of the coming Great Reset. Imagine for a second though, what these actors went through. What they went through was inhuman, family. All for the love of money and the cause we see wrecking the masses' conscience today. Chronicle Nation, have you seen these symbols before? Do you know who this woman is and who this man is? I'm sure many of you watching this chronicle don't even know who they are and don't even have a clue. Do you know why you don't know? Because you are not supposed to know. This is what the synagogues of Satan wants you not to know. And that's nothing. They don't want you to know nothing. They want us entertained by acting on the world stage and politics, movies, music, whatever, with fabricated beefs and wars. They want the world to stay high off illegal and so-called legal drugs and work yourself to death. If you know who this man and woman are, drop the name and what they were used to preach in the comments section. What about the symbol? What about these symbols, family? The images in this photo speaks 1,000 words. You can see these symbols everywhere. And you may say, well, Pastor, I see the Nazi symbol. See, that's where you are lost when it comes down to the know, or knowing and understanding the symbolism. You see, this symbol, people, represents a movement that has been here, but we saw the ugly head around or rising around 1875. You see, Nazi Germany was the German state between 1933 and 1945, when Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party controlled the country, transforming it into a dictatorship under Hitler's rule. But Hitler, people, was a pawn like all other leaders, kings, presidents, and rulers throughout time to usher in Satan's oldest warfare against the emperor God of all creation. And that's crowning Lucifer's anti-system to control humankind and plunder us into everlasting darkness. So if you see here, people, the theme of this masquerade is there is no religion higher than the truth. What is this truth they're talking about? Well, this truth is considered among a very few, or given, I may say, among a very few who call themselves the illuminated ones. The ones that possess the mystic truth. That's what this truth is. This truth is what Lucifer preached in the Garden of Eden, which is mysticism. That there's a truth that God hid from us, that man is equal to God. You see, Satan did this to exalt the cardinal being of man, so we would reject the law of God and receive the wrath of God that would come upon sin. This is what Hitler was programmed to do. And check out what this lost pawn said.
That's right. You're not Hitler. You're not a Nazi. You don't deserve to be called that and demonized.
Well, I see good things about Hitler also. The Jew, I love everyone. I'm done with the classifications. Every human being has something of value that they brought to the table, especially Hitler.
What is Kanye doing here, people? Well, Kanye West, or Ye or Ye, is doing the same thing that the Wizard of Oz and every other movie and artist did or is doing in our time. They are playing their part to distract, entertain, grab your emotions, and keep you deceived on this stage to deal with our feelings into accepting the false satanic truths in his system.
What is your profession?